Yeah.
Chicka. Yeah.
Kill Bill and Rev. We don't suck.
Hey, yo.
I had an intro planned, bro. It's fuck.
All right, yeah.
It goes like
This is you're nailing it.
No. I got it. What a little bitch. I got that yeah. What a little bitch. Listen to my podcast. We Don't Suck podcast. Listen to the podcast. Motherfucking podcast. Yeah.
You better keep that stumbling all over the place in the intro, too. Welcome back to the We Don't Suck podcast. It's your boy.
Stumbling all over the place. I hardly know her. Am I right?
That's just an inside joke. An insider, if you will. Insider. I don't even know her. Oh man, we're just a couple of tools.
Just a couple of tools in a shed of life.
All right.
You know what I mean?
Look at us, man.
Look.
Welcome back to the We Don't Suck podcast, bro. What the fuck?
What the fuck? How are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. You know, it's your host, Raph. Our special guest, Bill, is here. It's great. It's always nice to have you on.
Did you just
here.
Henry Zabrowski me? Did you just like fucking do the thing where like, oh, and with us is like literally no one's gonna know what I'm talking about unless they listen to the last podcast on the left. But I'm leaving it in.
But it's good
because I like them.
It's good to have you. You're one of my favorite guests.
Yeah, dude. Well, fuck you, bro. Honestly, you be ugly, dog. You so fucking ugly, man. But I'm glad to be here because I don't have to look at you.
Yeah, I'm glad I don't have to look at you either. I never do, even when we're together in person. But
that's why you just keep your eyes closed, just like at all times around me. Like you actually wear Cyclops shades when we're hanging out.
With the coronavirus being declared as a pandemic this week, it makes me sort of appreciate the distance between you and me, you know, because knowing that, like, I don't mind catching the coronavirus. I'm young and healthy. I know that you, on the other hand, you know, like, let's just say you are of age that is just, things can get a little shaky. It's not worth risking it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I'm only like a year older than
you know,
you.
so it's crazy to think how old you are, and yet, like, you know, despite our vast age gap, we are able to sort of find common ground and be friends, you know, on occasion. I feel like, obviously, our points of reference are incredibly different. You know, I grew up on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. You grew up on, you know, whatever they had
Betty
in the 20s. Betty Boop. Yeah, exactly. And racist
all
Donald
my
Duck.
90s kids remember Betty Boop.
So, you know, but despite all of that, I feel like it's kind of inspiring. I hope it's inspiring to other people to see that you and I get along the way that we do.
Wait. We have to have a conversation, okay? So I'm really fucking tired of people gatekeeping, like, what is a 90s kid, right?
Right.
Okay? I'm gonna, maybe this doesn't happen a lot. Maybe this is an atypical experience that I've had. But I will say that I've had people, okay, so it's like, for example, like I was born in 1990, okay? My girl was born in 96. Right.
Yeah.
So like I've had people tell her that she's not a 90s baby.
I feel
which
that.
I can sort of understand.
Yeah, I feel
I understand from a perspective. That, you know, like she didn't really like, she was like 4 in the year 2000. So it's not like you really like understand, but like,
No, yeah.
I do get the frustration because it's like, you don't feel like a 2000s kid because like you were born in the 90s. Right. However, I've recently been told that me, born in the threshold of what is a 90s child, you know, was not a 90s baby because I wasn't like a 10-year-old in the 90s.
Yeah, okay, that's where I think
And I
it's
don't
like
get that.
it's kind of ridiculous because I know you and I, for a fact, have a lot of fond memories from the 90s that are like very defining and like how we ended up what we ended up becoming, you know? We went through a lot of cultural events we lived through a lot of cultural events that defined the 90s. And we are able to recall a lot of the effects those cultural effects have had. Now, I think if you're born in 96, maybe even 95, it is a bit hard to call yourself someone who was a 90s kid, because you are someone who was born in the 90s, but to me, a 90s kid is someone who like grows up in the 90s. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I do think I would consider your girlfriend more of a 2000s kid, because she was more likely to remember the experiences from early 2000s, mid 2000s. That's the defining moments in her life. That's what I mean. It's not to erase the first 4 years of her life, but I think it's not unreasonable to think that, I feel, at least personally, when I think 90s or a 2000s kid or 80s kid, I think of people who grew up and, really lived through that era.
Yeah.
So, for instance, a lot of people born in the 80s consider themselves 90s kids because they were born in, like, let's say 87. You were born in 87, you're a 90s kid because you can't claim to, like, oh, dude, in 88 when this happened, fuck, man, I was there. I was about it. I remember it. It's unlikely,
totally
right?
makes sense, yeah.
But, like, if you're in 93 and you remember, like, so I feel like it makes sense in that regard. I definitely think you and I are 90s kids. We're both born early 90s, but we were present for long enough in the 90s where I think that we formed some characteristic shaping memories, and we had some characteristic shaping experiences for sure. By the time 2000 came around, I was in, I don't remember, 5th grade, 6th grade. I don't know. Like that to me means like, okay, yeah, I grew up on the block in the 90s, obsessing over Mortal Kombat and a bunch of 80s things that still were popular, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles,
Yeah.
and like He-Man and all of those things, and 90s fucking X-Men and Spider-Man and all those things. So to me, those are like, that's how, like, the way I look at it, the way I measure it is whenever like people talk about what cartoons they grew up on, like whether it's like just regular channels or Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon, I can gauge like, oh, okay, they're more of like late 90s kid. Oh, they're like, wow, they're about my age, or like, oh yeah, they sort of grew up mainly in the 2000s, because they're talking about like Danny Phantom and shit like that like is after me.
Yeah, a little bit after our time. I would say that Danny Phantom fucking slaps, but what I was gonna say is I think that a big indicator of if you were a 90s kid versus I think a 90s baby versus a 90s kid is two different things. And people use those terms, like, right? But like if you're a 90s kid, like I think that to qualify that, did you have the wakes of like Reagan era drug PSAs, like anti-drug PSAs on your cartoons? Like that's like the big, like when those stopped happening, I feel like that's when like your 90s baby like card starts kind of disappearing, and you become like a 2000s kid. You know what I mean? Or 90s kid.
Because a lot of people who are 90s babies that I don't consider 90s kids, but they do consider themselves 90s kids. A lot of the artists they look at as like, oh yeah, like this, like let's say Justin Timberlake, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Eminem, Limp Bizkit. These are all valid points that yes, these were like, if you're a 90s kid, you'll remember these very well because during when you would have come across them as a teen. As I was sort of becoming a teenager, all those things were, boy bands were all the rage. White rapper Eminem started becoming all the rage, and like a lot of these former Disney kids who started singing, like Justin Timberlake, Christina Aguilera, Britney Spears, started becoming popular. But that is not like a 90s phenomenon. That's like an early 2000s.
That's very 2000s.
But it's really 2000s thing more than anything. And I think it's, you look at 90s TV and you look at early 2000s TV, it's hard to discern the difference, like obviously the quality was quite similar, but it's more so cultural events and where people's heads were at, I think that kind of find that. But I also want to make another point where it doesn't fucking matter, because a lot of people call themselves 90s kids and they wear it as like a badge of honor. as if they earned, like, oh, I earned my way into being a 90s kid, you know? Like, my mother wanted to be pregnant with me for 6 years, but I was like, nah, 9 months in, I was tired of that shit. No, you did it.
Yeah, dude. Yeah.
That's not how it works.
Your sperm self had to race to the fucking finish line of the ovary.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for it to get to the egg, and it was like, you know what? I'm tired of this shit. Always missing, always dying. It's time for me to. I'm gonna earn this spot. So honestly, you know what? Fuck you, Rav, for saying that, because my sperm self, you know, me as a wee little sperm boy,
Fan art, please.
swimming through semen, had to fight for his right to be a 90s baby, a 90s kid.
Yeah.
Both things. Okay. And you aren't going to take that away from me just because you're slightly less of a 90s kid than me because you're younger than me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, I totally get if you want to classify yourself in terms of like, oh, these are the influences, these are the things that are prevailing, fine. But when I see it almost like, as you said, like gatekeeping, or like it's aggressively competitive, first of all you late 90s babies who desperately want to be called 90s kids, just let go. Y'all are part of a better generation, like straight up. You know, you just.
I wouldn't say that.
I would say that you guys were growing up on better games. Were getting better. Cartoons were getting, the quality of cartoons and everything was also improving. Yeah, sure. Like you could say like, oh, that's not true. Late 80s, early 90s, like we had Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball. That's fair. But I'm talking about like Western cartoons. Like took a good, like towards late 90s. That's when they started really improving. Like think like SpongeBob and shit, right? Think like shit, I'm trying to. Rugrats is a bit earlier, but like SpongeBob is a great example of that. I don't think you guys have missed out on anything just because you don't have cognizant memories of the 90s. And for you people like our age who consider ourselves 90s kids because we actually remember growing up being kids in the 90s. Again, it's not like it was our choice. It happened. Cool. Wasn't the coolest era. It's really weird that it's like everyone over obsesses over this specific era because like culturally it was super significant. You know, like for hip hop it was a culturally very significant era. For movies, for just music in general, for so many things for sure. But it is continued. That trend has continued since. And like gatekeeping at time, it's not even like. I just think it's dumb. I just think it's such a waste of time, and it's like, why take pride in something you have no control of?
Yeah, well, the reason why is because 90s culture became cool again through popular culture here. That's kind of like why, like,
and all that as well.
Like the nostalgia wave of like especially like the early 2010s and like Tumblr and stuff like that. Like everybody like jumped onto that, and then like there was this trickle down from that because like now, dog, I was seeing like vaporwave shirts in Target the other day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like I'm
dude,
like,
that's crazy.
Okay, like there's this trickle down from that, and like the people are just now getting hit like normal people that aren't like fucking weird shitlords on the internet.
And the VHS
like
obsession, the VHS quality obsession that still prevails. That's also, I guess, people, because it is quite tied to the 90s and people getting cassette tapes as well. That's, you could argue, it's not even 90s. You could say it's more of an 80s thing, in my opinion, but fair. Like that's
definitely.
That's another thing. And I think people are, and you know what's funny? I think you make a really good point. I feel like 20 or even 10 years from now, people are going to look back at the 2010s with that kind of nostalgia because they're like, man, I remember, it's 2011. I'm on Tumblr, on my vaporwave page, listening to Floral Shop.
I already do that thing that you're talking about.
Floral Shop is playing in the top left corner, and I'm looking through pictures of blah, 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 and people will finally have that, and then people will be like, well, actually, I grew up into the 2010s. You know, I was a true 2010s baby, blah, blah, whatever. I'm a 20s baby. Yeah.
So, but I think that's different, though. I think that the 2010s babies, like the people who will celebrate the 2010s aren't going to be the same people. It's going to be a different thing though, because like when you're like, if you grew up in the 2010s, right? I think that you're not going to have that knowledge of like that side of the internet or like that side of just culture in general. I think it's going to be a different thing entirely, which is like, I will say like the only thing that is totally different for me is like, when we were growing up, we were like that bridge between analog and digital. I think that's kind of why people like the 90s so much, is because like real 90s kids, like they went through the beginning to the end, went from like landlines to cell phones.
Yeah.
And went from like no
VHS
internet or
to
not
DVD.
using the internet very often to that VHS to DVD, like all this other stuff. And I think that like now, if you look at it, like all the kids that I know, Jordan's niece, both of her nieces, all of them, like they're obsessed with tablets. Like it's a different thing entirely. Like it's kind of like a different way of growing up. Like it makes me like, I can't be like weird about it, because I feel like if I'm like the dude who's like, wow, they have that tablet in front of them all the time, I'm the same as like my parents were with like, oh, he's always playing video games.
He's playing on his Game Boy, right? And the thing is, it's like, but what's curious, I think a lot of this, the discussion is a thing, because obviously people who grew up who were born in the late 90s and then were growing up in 2000s had the same exposure. They could easily access the same cartoons we were into and the same movies and the same music. So maybe they did feel like, oh, all these teenagers and slightly older kids, they're bumping so much of this 90s shit, and there's still remnants of 90s culture so heavily present in the early 2000s. They thought to themselves like, well, we were exposed to the same things you guys were, so we are just as 90s as you were.
Yeah.
And that's why it brings... that's why I said specifically growing up when those things were happening is different to like revisiting those things. I can revisit 70s music, 70s culture, movies, all that, be in love with it, fully understand it, and even have some nostalgia about it, because I might recall something from when I was younger, seeing older 70s and 80s movies. But you can't say that experience is the same as like Rocky coming out and you seeing it in theaters. You know, you can't compare it to the same feeling as like Michael Jackson dropping Thriller and you seeing it like for the first time on TV, same week as everybody else is seeing it for the first time. These are like cultural events, and then political events like Reagan being voted in, and like what that effect had. What effect that had on people during his presidency, and what was the following president. Like all these things are cultural events, and it's not to take again away from people's experiences. And you and I could have just as many things in common as Joe, because maybe she grew up on the exact same cartoons and everything. But again, those experiences and when they came out, the context, the time context, the significance. These are the things that I think are a little bit more defining of what 90s kid is. 90s kid
definitely. And also just like speaking on like political events and stuff like that, like 2000s kids had a weird one because they had 9/11. Like that was like I mean, 90s kids too, because like I was a kid when 9/11 happened too.
I think
10,
arguably you could argue that like, it's 90s kids and 90s babies probably experience, like if you were born in 2000, you don't remember 9/11, you know? If you were born in 98, you probably don't remember 9/11.
We had like Columbine, like that was like one that was like a big, like Columbine was like a really weird time for everybody, because like as a kid, like I didn't have like a grasp on like what Columbine was. I just knew it was bad. I didn't have like a grasp on like it was like this scary thing. And like I always like, for some reason, I always put Columbine and the Blair Witch Project in the same kind of like pocket of my brain, and I don't know why.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually a good way to put it. Same here.
Yeah, exactly. And like for some reason, I just look at the Blair Witch Project as being as scary as Columbine, and that's not the truth at all. But yeah, like that whole thing of like motherfuckers like kids having to get patted down, and like metal detectors being put in schools and like shit like that. Now I went to like a super small school, and we didn't really deal with all of that, but like I had friends who would always talk about like, oh, such and such with the metal detectors and like securities being beefed up in schools and stuff. It was like a very different time, and it was all due to this one event. Yeah. You know, I feel like the 90s kid equivalent to 9/11 in terms of like cultural impact from a like tragedy would have been Columbine.
Yeah, 9/11 is a great example in terms of like what that changed for travel. I remember things like, obviously lots of people, you know, even from early 2000s will remember people smoking in establishments, like inside houses and everything.
Oh yeah, the smoking section, man.
That's the smoking section in places. And then, but there were other things.
Hold on, can we just like talk about the smoking section for a second? Because like, It is so wild because like they got rid of the smoking sections here.
Yeah.
When I was like maybe like 8 or 9, I think was when like you didn't see them at all anymore. You know, like towards the end of the 90s, it was like completely like that's at least to my knowledge. It might have been before that or a little after.
It was like, a bit afterwards in most of the world, but yeah.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking like I cannot imagine going to a restaurant. I could see like a bar, but like I could never see like a restaurant and then like this motherfuckers are just like smoking. Like, isn't that weird?
It is
to think
weird,
about?
but I remember that. I remember my dad smoking. I remember
See, my parents didn't smoke.
Yeah. Well,
I didn't really have that part of my life.
So I remembered those things, but also I remember like traveling by plane being like a way easier and quicker and more efficient process before 9/11. That's when they started taking, you know, checking your bags and x-raying you and all that like a lot more seriously, because prior to that, it was just nothing ever like that happened, so no one even thought about it. Like, why would anyone do something like that, right?
What was it prior to? Because, like, I never was on a plane. The first plane that I took was the one we went to Wisconsin in like
it's just
2017.
basically, it was just a lot, like, checks and everything were a lot quicker. You can bring in liquids. You could bring, like, it was just, people were less suspicious. It didn't feel like, oh my God, it was.
Did they like metal detect you or anything? Or like,
I don't even. That's the thing. I don't even remember if there were metal detectors. I think they may have been metal detectors just for things like guns. You know. To make sure that you didn't have a gun on you, but like it wasn't half as strict, and the regulations and rules weren't half as strict. Yes, there were certain things like you can't bring canisters of like compressed gas that's like this because it can just like under pressure blow up. So obviously they check for things like that, but like liquids was the big thing. I remember liquids being a big thing. Was like, are you kidding me? I can't bring juice or water on the plane. Like, that's nuts. It's like, well, yeah,
that is pretty different.
So,
well, that's something that happened to me, and I didn't like really know it was like liquids. And I know they're kind of weird about batteries sometimes. I don't know exactly how that works.
Yeah, lithium batteries. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I've like, but yeah, I never went through as a kid, we didn't fly a lot, like at all. Like I don't think my dad's ever been on a plane. My mom went on a plane to Chicago in like 2013 or something.
Right.
But pretty much it's just like I'm the one who flies.
Right, yeah. Towards the late 90s is when my mom married my stepdad, and that's when we started, like, you know, we came out. He pulled us out of the slums and offered us a way better lifestyle, and we ended up traveling a lot, flying a lot. And so I remember that quite vividly, just because of the drastic change going from the post-Soviet slums to, like, you know, 5-star hotels and like living a way different lifestyle completely. And it's just, these things kind of stick with you, you know. But I say all of this to just communicate this point, is that it's fine if you didn't grow up in the 90s and you love 90s culture and stuff, and you find that like the most inspiring stuff and you have the most nostalgia for that. No one can take that away from you. And I think if somebody says like, oh wow, you're fetishizing the 90s, you know, it was actually a terrible time, it was super racist and this and that, but you wish you were in the 90s and you love just because of Pokemon cards or just because of Nintendo 64 or like whatever the fuck people say, just ignore those people because obviously they're fucking idiots. But you don't have to be a 90s kid.
I mean, if we want to be real, pretty much any time is racist. Like, you know
exactly.
Like
that's
any
facts.
time period.
And so, like, if you enjoy something, you can enjoy it without necessarily saying, like, yeah, it was the perfect time. There's never been a perfect time, you know? Look at the 80s. There was a little 80s revival, fetishizing the 80s, you know, with, like, things like Stranger Thing. Was it Stranger Thing or Stranger Things? I don't remember what it was called.
Stranger Things.
But
sorry, that's you sound like a real
boomer,
real 80s baby right now, dude.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I love that.
Sound like a real
season.
50s baby.
But yo, you know, like that was happening, and then people were like, oh shit, like rediscovering the punk music from the 80s and rediscovering the pop music of the 80s, and like, oh shit. And then, you know, Bowie died and Prince died around this revival, and people then revisiting their incredible discographies, you know, especially during that period of time. And a lot of people like, wow, and they identify with it. And a lot of this, again, was happening towards the tail end of the Tumblr era, where a lot of kids, I feel like a lot of hipsters like the fashion that they see in how people like what was considered cool in the 80s, and how these shows portray the 80s. It seems very romanticized. So a lot of people really now like the 80s and they love it, and most of these people who are obsessed with it are like either 90s kids or even 2000s kids. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, because nobody ever complains about the 20-something-year-old lady who puts on outfits that were popular in the 1930s. Nobody says, yo, you're not a 30s baby. Nobody says that because, like,
I do.
Well, duh.
Yo,
like,
I do. I do say that. You know why I say that,
Why?
man? I have this thing against like things that are like, okay, like I love like pretty much, I feel like almost all time periods, you can make like something interesting out of them, right? Okay. And I'm not saying that the things that are based out of the 1920s to the 40s are like not good, but I will say I like hate that aesthetic so much, and I don't know why. Like I see like, and it's not like necessarily like the time period itself or like the aesthetic itself. It's like the type of people who be like, oh yeah, like I don't know if it like the music was a little different. Am I tripping? Am I weird for this? For like not being into that?
I mean, it's you. Like I'm into it. I like it. When I met my girl, she
It
used
just
to
makes
work
me think
for
of motherfuckers with like fedoras and shit, man. Like not back then, but people who like wear fedoras now
for
would
sure.
be like into that.
Well, my
like,
girl, when I met her, she used to like really dress. I forgot. There's like these areas have names, and I might be bastardizing whichever. I don't remember.
Did she dress like a flapper?
I don't remember which era was the 20s, 30s, or 40s in terms of fashion and hairstyles, But she was into it. She worked at a store where they sold like older, like that specific style of clothing in Camden, which is like this area in London where all cultures are like, all underground or forgotten cultures are there. Like there's goth clubs, there's like clubs and places for people who want to dress like people did in the 1930s. There's a lot of 80s and 90s revivalist stuff, and like it's just a bunch of different things. And there's a store that sold like this older kind of clothing, and it's really pretty, It looks very flattering.
I don't think I even necessarily mean that though. Like I don't think I mean like someone who goes out and like wears like the clothing is. I'm specifically, there was a time period where like video games and movies were like obsessed with like that era, and like everyone listened to like knockoff swing music for a minute. Do you remember like that being a thing?
That, yeah.
And like I just look back on that. I'm not talking about like the time itself. I'm talking about like media that like I think that.
I think what happened, the problem with that is the way that people obsess with things can put you off of the thing itself. We've seen that with artists, cartoons, like let's say Rick and Morty. If you before watching the cartoon, you just like were exposed to a bunch of the worst types of fans of the Rick and Morty show, you would think it's probably the worst thing that's happened in recent times, culturally.
Yeah.
Then you watch and you're like, oh no, this is good. Why are the fans so fucking annoying? And it's the same for maybe like, I don't know, let's say Ariana Grande or something, or K-pop.
I know like
stands.
Steven Universe had like a really bad case of that.
Steven Universe one. K-pop maybe is another example. Or I don't know, there's examples where like the audience are so annoying, or their obsession, the way obsessed is so annoying that it puts you off of it. But again, I never look at them as the people who are an accurate reflection of the actual people who enjoy the thing. It's kind of like the Bernie Bros effect, where I don't agree that, the more angry rhetoric of Bernie Bros that you see online is indicative of the average Bernie Sanders supporter. I could even argue there's Russian bots that fuel these kinds of conversations, but that's for a different day. I do think that like we need to be careful with seeing how people receive something and make assumptions about that thing based off of like who flocks to it. Because yes, like I agree with you, like during that era where people were like, oh shit, the swing era music, blah blah. I think you're talking about the time when like the Great Gatsby movie came out. Jay-Z did a whole lot of songs that sounded like glorifying that era.
It was like that, and you had like you had like BioShock and like which is a fantastic game, and like Fallout, which is a fantastic game.
Yeah,
like,
I see what you're saying.
You had like all these games that were like kind of that, but then you also had this like kind of weird way. I don't even know how to describe it, man. It's like this kind of like this is like vague memory that I've almost repressed of like early 2010s and late 2000s games, specifically video games. Like, and I'm giving you the best examples of them, and I can't tell you like
those were the best
I
ones,
can't tell you like bad ones because like I don't remember like that.
But I know what you're saying, like the revival of steampunk. Again, I have nothing against steampunk,
Yes.
but the like, you know, the steampunk that was kind of like the fedora tip equivalent of steampunk,
Yes.
and people being obnoxious.
That is exactly what I mean. And steampunk could be so cool. Like the idea of steampunk is like so fire to me, but it's just kind of like I feel like it was co-opted by like a group of people that I not necessarily dislike but don't vibe with at all. And I think that like turned me off of it completely.
You know, like I think we might have talked about this before. This kind of goes back to the idea, do not idolize people, right? I don't idolize people. I do think if I met someone like Q-Tip or Nas, I would like, I'd feel shook. And maybe I'd tear up or something, right? Just because they had like a significant, they almost raised me. I grew up without a father, and the way their significance to me in my life was important, but more so their music, right? And it's hard sometimes to separate the symbolic representation of that music and the music itself. But ultimately, do not glorify people. Do not idolize people. They will disappoint you. No one's perfect. And that doesn't mean that like, oh, they did a bad thing, so everything else they did has no good value. And the same way that I think that rule should apply to times as well. So I do not remember the 1920s fondly. First of all, I wasn't there. I don't know what it's like. If I wanted to know what it's like,
wow,
I'd ask
dude,
you.
What a faker. You're talking about this thing, you weren't even there,
If
bro.
I wanted to know what it's like, I'd ask you. But I don't agree. And like, honestly, most
it
of
was
the things...
fucking sick, bro.
And most of the things
tight.
about the 1920s were pretty terrible, you know? There's so many terrible things about it. But I can also appreciate Louisiana blues. Does it come from pain, strife, and being disenfranchised and still not being on equal footing with, white people, and a lot of most of the women still not being on equal footing with men, period, you know? Facts. That's true. And I'm not saying like, man, that was the best time. I'm just saying out of that pain and everything, it's incredible that something like blues, especially to me, my favorite genre of blues, Louisiana blues, came out of that. And I can appreciate that. And so if I can appreciate that and not agree with the 1920s or things that happened or say that it was a good time at all, because I'm not saying it was a good time at all, I'm just glad that music was made then I think you could appreciate 90s the same way without being told you're fetishizing it. There's certain things you liked about it. That doesn't mean you're a supporter of Reaganomics.
I don't understand this like super binary way of looking at things. Like just because you enjoy something about something doesn't mean that you like co-sign everything that, okay, for example, and I think this is something that you can kind of pick and choose based off of your moral code, you know?
Yeah.
I could enjoy like some artist or like some person I know nothing about at all, but like look at their art and be like, wow, this is really good. But then like, if you show me the darkest, worst part of that person, I guess that's like up to me to make that decision, whether or not like that impacts my worldview hard enough to where I don't really want to like be reminded by this. And for me, that threshold is pretty high. Like, it's kind of like you got to be like a real fucked up dude for me to like completely that overshadow, and then like as all I can think about is that thing, you know. But my thing is like with time periods is like really hard because like there's good people too. Like I mean, like obviously you're gonna have parts of like the 90s, for example. Like a lot of terrible things happened in the 90s in the same way that a lot of terrible things happened in the 2010s or in the 1940s. It's like all these different things that happen. Obviously, the further back you go, the more like disenfranchised, like especially like people of color will be. But I also think that like you can enjoy stuff from a time period because like not necessarily everything has to come back to this time, like to just pain and suffering. And also pain and suffering makes good art a lot of times. And I don't think that like it's like I understand where people are coming from in that, like, but I also think that you can't live your life thinking like, well, during this time period, this happened, so I can't like anything from that time
I can't
period.
appreciate,
because, like,
the Mona Lisa because there's that and the third.
That's so, like, I just feel like you're blocking out like this like wonderful like trove of fucking delights.
Yeah.
Just because you don't agree with like maybe like a majority of people at the time.
Yeah, the facts is,
you know?
like, some of the world's most important scientists who, thanks to whom we're able to do everything and you're enjoying everything now, probably not perfect people. You know, who knows? Maybe Einstein used to, like, you know, was maybe an abusive husband, or was agreed to a monogamous relationship but then didn't respect it, or whatever. Different people have different thresholds for what is acceptable, what is not. But does that mean you're going to stop using mobile phones? Because if it weren't for his theory of relativity, we wouldn't be able to have a GPS system or have satellites or an understanding of how to do that. No. So and the art that you're blocking out, you know, because, like, let's say there's a philosopher or a painter that you think their art is cool or whatever, but you ignore it because, like, you found out, like, a horrible fact about them, right? It's like, well, its cultural significance is so strong that whether you ignore it or acknowledge it, you're going to be engaging in something in your life that exists as, like, almost a butterfly effect thing of that happening in the first place, right? So that's one thing. Now, the other thing in terms of, like, supporting people after you're finding out they're piece of shit and they're still alive. So the argument I've heard here, and I think it's a fair argument to at least discuss, is that, like, okay, fair enough, you can enjoy the art that you enjoy, but the moment you find out the person is a pedophile or something like that, let's say, right, the worst case scenario almost, is a pedophile, then why would you knowingly put money in their pocket by continuing to listen to them, by continuing to Google them, by continuing, you know, to bring their name up, or, like, engaging in their art when you know what they've done and you're basically enabling them just out of your own selfish, your selfish reasons. And to be 100% honest with you, I don't have an answer for that yet. I've thought about it for a long time. I don't know. But I do think whatever happens, however I choose to eventually address that hypocrisy within me, it can be dealt with in a very binary way, you know, because like, you know, the one person I had this argument with, and I said, well then what stops me from just being ignorant and not look into people at all, just enjoy art and never find out who the people are? And that person ended up saying, like, well, actually, no, it's your responsibility. Every person should look up what they eat. Every person should find out where the music is made, who the movie is made. And I said, like, well, bro, like, usually 300 people work on a movie.
Yeah.
Let's say, and, like, one of those people is a piece of shit. How much research do I have to do to find out they're a piece of shit? And just because they're a piece of shit, does that mean the other 299 need to suffer? And that's why I don't have a binary answer to that, right? And this is why I think this is where, when we say separate the art and the artist, this is why, because at that point it's ridiculous. I want to enjoy culture. I want to enjoy art without. I don't think I'm gonna fall into the pitfalls a lot of these people who disagree with me are concerned about, because I don't idolize people in the first place. So when you tell me Kevin Spacey is a monster, am I disappointed? Yes, because I enjoy his acting. I enjoyed his acting. I loved what he's done in a lot of roles. And you know what? I still think that was a job well done. But is he a piece of shit? He is. Am I heartbroken about it? Not really, because he's not my idol.
Kevin Spacey was a real tough one for me because, like, I was such a big fan of his work. I mean, I still am. Like, I mean, he's a terrific actor.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, there's, like, no, like, you cannot tell me that he's not a good actor. Like, is he, like, a horrible person? Yes. And that's, like, why it was, like, and Cosby was tough for me, too. Like, Cosby was tough because...
Yeah, Cosby was tough.
Because I grew up watching Cosby himself.
Same.
You know, like, I had the VHS tape. I remember the day I got it was the same day that I got this like the Kirby 64 game, and it's like I look back on that day very fondly, and it's kind of like the equivalent of like finding out that you have like a family member who's like abusive or like
and you
sexually abusive, which is like and it's like legitimately hit me like that. And like, I think for me, and I know this is like a selfish way to look at things, but for me, it's like less about like supporting the person, like, or like not supporting the person. Obviously you don't support I would never support like a rapist. You know what I mean? But in my head, for me, it's less of a quandary of like, was the art good? Is it like, when I listen to the person, when I see the person, when I watch the person, is that the only thing that's going to be running through my mind while I watch it? And I think like with Cosby, like it is like, I can't watch a Cosby stand up because the whole time I'm thinking like this dude was like fucked up, or like R. Kelly. I think like Remix to Ignition is like one of my I always would say to people, Remix to Ignition is the best song of all time. Like it was kind of a joke, but I was like talking about like everyone likes that song. Like I don't know anyone who does not like that song. My mom likes that song. My fucking like the toughest dude I know likes that song. You know what I mean? Song. Like I'd always talk about like, and then now it's like when I go and listen to it, I'm just thinking about him having a sex dungeon while he's making this. You know what I mean? It's like, it's kind of a weird, like, and I know that's like on me and that is just how I perceive things. But like, to me, it's like, it's really hard with like rappers and stuff, because I think when you're a rapper, you kind of like are selling yourself more than the art. Like a lot of times, like it's like there's been times when I haven't really liked someone's music that much, but then I looked them up and like watched their interviews and stuff, and I was like, wow, this person is like a really cool person. Maybe I should give them another chance, And I know I'm not the only person who thinks that way. And I do think that like for me, it's very hard for me to separate the artist and the artist, the artist and the artist, or separate the art from the artist, because to me, a lot of times I look at them very similarly. So it's like, I know that not everyone looks at it that way. So like a lot of times when something bad happens or something comes out about someone, it's not even as much a moral quandary with me. It actually like impacts my experience. Yeah. So it's kind of like,
and then it's on you to make the decision for yourself. And I feel like that's why I feel I'm fortunate enough where over the last few years, when I was growing up, I definitely idolized a whole lot of artists, but over the last 5-6 years of my life, I've been able to start letting go of that approach to seeing, like, intertwining artists and art in the way that I used to. I am now able to separate them a little more, because these people aren't my heroes. Their music is what moves me, and not every move they make is what moves me. And the internet's been a great help with that, actually, because now we're exposed to people more regularly, via Twitter, YouTube, Instagram Live and shit like that. You get to see people that you thought were like these, perfect, flawless individuals, just being like normal ass people, saying sometimes dumbass shit, making mistakes, being wrong, not being aware that they're wrong sometimes. And it's just like seeing all these like human traits and flaws that are present in you and your friends and your enemies and everyone. And then it makes it difficult for me to seriously idolize people, because they're people. And so that's where I'm glad I'm able to start separating the art. And, until like for the first 3-4 years that I listened to music, I didn't know what most of the artists I listened to looked like. I didn't know what Tip and Five looked like until like 3 years after I'd been listening to them already, like on a regular. Because to me, it was
a very different time.
Yeah,
I just remember like I would like grade my dad's CDs all the time, all the like dad rock he would listen to, and I had this general idea of like what everyone looked like. And I was actually pretty spot on, because all those dudes just had long hair. but I remember, what was that band? Boston. Do you know Boston? Yeah. They did like More Than a Feeling. Mm-hmm. He had one of those CDs, and those dudes looked nothing like I thought they looked. Oh, yeah. They were a very different vibe. But 100%. Like I remember like there was a time period when it was like I had CDs with no cases. because my dad had a big ass CD case. My mom did too. And it was like one of those like books, like a bookcase type, not a bookcase, but you know what I mean? Like one that was shaped like a book. And you're like, I would like go through them and then I would just see the art and I would like make an assumption based off what I thought people looked like. And I was wrong a lot of the times, you know, but like, it was like, it was like I always looked at these people as like these, like, I thought that they were perfect and super cool, you know?
Yeah.
And like, now it's just like I kind of miss the times when like there was a separation and people were just enigmatic to me, because I miss these like superhero type people that don't really exist in my mind.
See, yeah, I'm glad
And,
it changed
like,
because I feel like that was the danger, and that's what led to us idolizing people in the first place.
yeah, but then it makes me realize that my favorite rapper kind of sucks as a person.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
All
like,
your heroes.
I don't like
in
that.
In the words of JPEG Mafia, all my heroes are corny, or cornballs.
Yeah.
And it's true, and they're all disappointments. And you know what? Take whatever you like. Find a person that hasn't been canceled. You love their music, blah blah. I bet if you scrutinize them and inspect every inch of their lives, you'll find something you dislike. So let's do a thought experiment. Where there's Bill in dimension A and Bill in dimension B. In dimension A, Bill is super into, let's say in this dimension, he's super into DMX, and turns out that in this dimension, DMX is like a serial killer, right? Of children, specifically.
Yeah.
Of Asian children, right? For whatever reason, that's in this dimension, DMX just murders Asian children.
He's the Rav Hunter.
The Rav Hunter, right? And in dimension B, it's exactly the same. He's also just murdering a bunch of Asian children, right? But in dimension A, Bill finds out about this. He's super into DMX, loves his music, only listens to DMX, finds out about DMX being a serial killer. And in dimension B, same reality, you know, Bill listens to a lot of DMX. DMX is this horrible person, but Bill never finds out. And when I present this
or even better, like the world never finds out.
Or the world never
Like,
finds out. Yeah, exactly. So
yeah, the world never finds out that DMX is just killing a bunch of small children.
Actually, let's make that dimension C. So dimension C is where nobody knows that he's murdering children. Dimension B, the world knows except for Bill. And dimension A, everybody knows, including Bill, right? So dimension A, when you bring this argument to people who say, no, you can't separate art from artists, they say like, yes, you have a responsibility to then stop listening to DMX. In dimension B, people will actually also say you're at fault for not knowing. They'll say, at least some people that have argued this point, I'm not sure everyone would agree with them who side with that side of the argument, but a lot of people have told me like, well, no, it's your job to do the research. And I think, and I want to address my issue with that. I feel like it's an incredibly overprivileged opinion to even have in the first place, because it assumes that you have the fucking time, or that you have, you know, if let's say you're a person of color, still disenfranchised, you are having to grow up and only with your mother. She's no longer able to work for whatever reason. You have to take care of her and your little brothers. You have to go to school or college, but you also have to do 2 jobs just to be able to help the family out. And in between time, you listen to this music that helps pump you up. It serves a purpose to you, right? Oh, turns out you're listening to the music of a rapist and you didn't know because you didn't do the research? Dude, fucking do some research. No, it's a privilege to have that time and to have even like the thought like, I should investigate every artist that I am into. And this is why most of the people who make this argument are upper middle class or middle class white people that make this argument where you have to, and again, I'm not trying to be racist against white people. I know I oftentimes am, but I'm just saying like it's the privilege. It's more of a class thing than a race thing here. I think if you think that there is this responsibility that people should hold, then I think you have a very distorted understanding of how people's lives are, and that not everyone has the same faculties, but also circumstances as you. And in dimension C, just lastly to wrap it up, at this point is if nobody knows, then I guess no one's at fault, right? Because the whole world doesn't know. There's no information out there to provide it. So then it's fine to listen to him and support him, right? But you're still supporting a murderer. you're still supporting this person. You're just ignorant to it. So is ignorance, if the argument is ignorance is bliss, then it's like, well, I don't know. I feel like that, again, is a shallow and a binary conclusion to reach. And that's why I don't have the answers. But I do think the point comes from
course, it's like of course, it's a shallow and binary way to do things. But like most simple answers to things are shallow and binary. Like if I say like,
true,
like, oh yeah, I miss a time when I didn't know people sucked, is like, obviously, if someone was a fucking murderer, I would want to know, you know what I mean? But like I would want to, like, oh yeah, by the way, like, I'm just like chilling, listen, I'm like the biggest DMX fan of all time. I'm like, yo, I fuck with DMX so hard, you know, when he said that one thing, and then like my friend came up to me and was like, yo, you know, like, he just can't stop murdering children.
Asian children.
You know, Asian children specifically.
We don't know why.
I would be like, it's just his thing, you know? I would be very shocked and appalled. Basically what I'm getting at is that I feel like I've, up until a certain point in my life, I had a very like optimistic worldview, and I feel like I still do. I like to see the good in people, and I do understand that people aren't perfect, especially the ones that murder little Asian children. But I do like to see the good in people and hope that, I know that good people do bad things sometimes.
Yeah.
Or like, it's not necessarily like that easy to say, like, I don't know. I feel like this is kind of a thing where it's like, I don't ever want to excuse someone for doing something terrible, but I do understand that like people are complex and complicated, and like there are people out there who have done really good things who are also terrible people, and there's people who have done bad things that have tried their best to be good people after the fact.
Look at Gandhi. Look at Gandhi. He was great for his people. Also, was incredibly racist against black people. Look at Lincoln. He emancipated the slaves, but was also like saying shit like, well, obviously they're not equal and they'll never vote. We just don't think we should enslave them anymore. Look at Darwin. His contribution to science is incredible. Evolution is now the staple of all of our understanding of human biology, right? Also didn't think black people were equal to that of white. You know, and you keep I'm not excusing them for these things, but you can't say that the changes brought about by them or the cultural significance and impact needs to be erased. And also the context of time needs to be not erased from these conversations, because in the era of everyone being woke, it's easy to judge an era when the contemporary thoughts weren't as woke or as liberal, or you know what I mean? So like we can hate on this, be like, man, everybody was super racist, or everybody was so dumb, or like blah blah. Yeah, but that's like that. They were products of their circumstances, upbringing, and other dumb opinions around them. You're able to have the opinions that you have and be as woke and as appalled and everything as you are because of how time has worked itself out, how society has like progressed and evolved socially, and this is why you have these opinions in the first place. And I think people need to be careful with pointing fingers, because it is throwing bricks in a glass house. Because if you go too hard, if you go too binary, I'd say look inwards and you will find that you are a hypocrite. Because the same people that were telling me I am responsible for doing research as to who makes the movies that I watch and who makes the music that I listen to, these same people didn't find out where their food was sourced necessarily, or where the fabrics that were sewn into their clothes were sourced at, right? Or the materials in their phones were sourced at, and with what kind of, you know what I'm saying? So I'm not saying
it's impossible. It's impossible to keep up with all that.
So what is the solution?
No way.
So what is the solution? My proposed solution is like a long-term one. It's not telling everybody individually that they have to research each single thing they fucking take part in, because that's obviously unrealistic. And again, it comes from a point of privilege, and it's a classist. To me, that suggestion in itself, it's classist bordering on racist, because I think it's ignorant, and I don't think it's willfully racist. I think it's racist out of ignorance and classist out of ignorance and inconsideration. Yeah. But also, I think what we need to do is we need to improve our understanding. Maybe change certain things in education that maybe spotlight these things. That maybe there's things that we can collectively do as people to agree on to start moving in the right direction. And I'm not aligning myself with centrists here who say, hey, I agree with all the right things you say, but everything needs to run its course. I think we need to be proactive, but we need to be proactive in thinking about things long term, but also short term, and thinking outside of our privilege and thinking in the context of like, okay, how do we do this in a way that is actually meaningful? Because if you just shout at people and you tell people to not be a certain way, you're going to push them over the edge. That kind of talk is divisive. If anything, it's going to make people want to do the thing that you don't want them to do just because they feel offended that you have to tell them like so aggressively to not be themselves in the first place. It is if your rhetoric does not come from a place of love or understanding, then how the fuck do you expect people to understand, agree, and love what you're saying, and then join hands with you and sing Kumbaya? So understanding.
I understand. I understand the attitude. In terms of like the aggression that comes out of it, because people get so like hung up on stuff now, because I feel like we're in this like generation that's kind of tired of waiting for things. Facts. And we're tired of just like accepting things. And that is 100% like, I'm right there with you. Like, I get it. Like, I don't want to like get too like political or anything like that, but like, I feel like every time that like we as a society get like more progressive, something happens that kind of pushes that back, and there is always going to be that push and pull of things. But I will say that like, I feel like there's a difference in being progressive and being like not fucked up. Like, there's two different things entirely, if that makes any sense. And I think that innately humans are kind of fucked up. Like, that's just like a part of what we're going to deal with. We are not more intelligent. I mean, we actually might be. I don't know how that works, but like, I don't think that like innately that like we're just like born smarter now. We just like have more tools than we did 100 years ago.
Exactly. The upbringing and everything that we have is now allowed. Yes, our IQ, our general average IQ is way higher than that of our grandparents during their times, but that's because of the benefit of the education changing the way that it is, culture changing the way it is, us being exposed to more media, the internet, all these things, they play a part. So we need to be grateful for because we got this in the first place because of the previous generations. They were guinea pigs of their times, as we are of our times. You know, there are a lot of people currently believe that 200 years from now, people are going to look back at those who used to eat meat and say like, wow, what the fuck were we thinking, you know? And if you do enough research, you might look into it and you see the trend of decline of meat eating, and you could see that, well, you know what, maybe that's what's going to happen, especially now that we are now entering the zone of being able to manufacture meat in a lab, right? It's not, wherever your opinion aligns on vegetarianism, it doesn't matter, right? I'm not saying like who's right, who's wrong. I'm just saying maybe once time has passed, and let's say we all become vegans or vegetarians or whatever, and we look back at people who ate meat, we'd probably also, some people would be quick to judge. But then some people would be like, hey, come on, they were products of their time. That's how they grew up. They blah, blah, blah. And I'm not comparing that with something like racism. I'm just saying opinions change, and things that we consider are fucked up or not fucked up or less fucked up. These things change. They're ever morphing. I'm just a rapper, so do not take my word for it and like as if I'm some sort of, you know.
Yeah, like don't idolize my man.
Yeah, I'm not a philosopher. I'm not a scientist. I'm a rapper with an opinion and the experiences that I have. And who knows, maybe a few years from now, I'll look back at this and be like, you know what, my opinions have vastly changed. But yeah, I you know, one thing I never regretted throughout my life. I have a question for you. Just one. One thing I was going to say, like one thing, like I regret a lot of things about my opinions throughout time as I was changing as a person and like coming up, you know, and becoming an adult and everything. I look back at a lot of things with regret. You know what? Some of the qualities that I don't look back at with regret are the moments where I did things out of love, because even if they ended up in like things that didn't kind of work out for me or for someone else, knowing that I was entering those things. And I don't want to sound like a hippie. What I mean by love is just understanding and empathy and not rushing in too emotionally or too from a binary standpoint, because yes, when you're angry, it's hard to see anything other than black and white. But if you know that this is true, you have to uncondition yourself, relearn things, and get better, because patience is important. If for love to prevail, patience is important, and learning is important, and therefore admitting that you are probably wrong or were wrong and just moving forward is important. As long as your motion is forwards, success is constantly approaching. That's my piece.
Wow, that sounds like some real hoe shit. I don't know where that came from. Felt the right thing to say. That was good. I agree with everything that you said, and I don't want to transition, but I want to talk about that thing I wanted to talk about earlier before we're done.
Okay. Ad time. Hey, Bill, I have a question for you.
Tell me about it.
Do you have air conditioning?
No.
Have you ever been in a building that has air conditioning?
One might say that I haven't.
Could you imagine yourself in a room where there is air conditioning, like an air conditioning unit installed?
I could imagine it in another world.
So imagine it. Close your eyes.
Okay.
Thought experiment.
All right. My eyes
You're
are
in
closed.
your bedroom. There's an air conditioner in the top left corner of your bedroom, right?
Okay. All right.
Annoyingly, it's blowing air.
Stupid. Hate it.
Dumb, right? You wish it was mayo, but it ain't. It's just air.
I've said that out loud in my brain.
Introducing Mayo AC.
Tell me about it.
Mayo C.
Mayo C. That might be my. This might be the best product we've ever had on here. Okay.
Mayo C is mayo conditioning units that.
Why are we doing this, man? What is this? What is this? What are we doing with our fucking lives? You know,
sometimes I'd be laying in my bed and I'm like eating my sandwich. I just made a sandwich. I get in bed. I'm like about to watch Tom and Jerry. I'm like, oh hell yeah! I wonder what happens in this episode and how it ties in with the previous episode.
Yeah,
and
right.
This is the season finale. So like, who's gonna die? Because I'm feeling shook. And I'm like, I take a bite out of my sandwich. I'm like, hold up, something's missing.
Yeah.
I take the top bun off and I'm like, Jesus Christ, I forgot the mayo. I reach for the AC remote. I turn it on. To my dismay, it blows cold air on me. Like, this is not what I need right now.
Yeah.
This is not what I want. This is not what is necessary in this situation. So let's take it all from the top again. Current day. Same shit. About to watch the last episode of Tom and Jerry. Something's missing in my burger.
Yeah.
I take the top bun off. I reach for the Mayo C remote. Hit on. Bam. Mayo all over that burger.
Well, is it just the burger? Like, did it go everywhere else?
Sandwich, a little bit on the bed, on me, on the floor, on the walls. But the most important thing is I'm not watching Tom and Jerry without fucking mayo in my sandwich.
Yeah.
Not no more. Thanks to Mayo C. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Technology. What's in it?
Mayo. It shoots mayonnaise. You have to load it up with mayo cartridges every once in a while, but it's pretty straightforward.
This is rough
mayonnaise.
money. This is a rough product. I hope it's good. So where can we get it?
I don't know about it being a rough product. It's been so useful to me in my life. I actually don't like your tone, Bill, and I'm worried we might lose the sponsor.
I'm not gonna lose the sponsor, bro. They don't fucking listen to this bullshit, man. Like, they don't care.
Okay.
They put mayonnaise in an AC unit, and you think they'll care?
It's not an AC. It's a Mayo C unit.
I'm gonna fucking murder.
And so, yeah, you can get yours now on soundcloud.com / Kill Bill on the Beat. Just hit the little like mail or letter logo at the top right corner.
Yeah.
And just type in the code. You have small beepy, and just hit send. I think it's called send message or something like that. Do that, and then you are likely to receive your own MayoC for free, provided it hasn't run out. By the time you've messaged, if
it's
you don't
all
get
gone already.
Oh, actually, no, they've just restocked. I just got a notification email, so go ahead and do that while it's not too late.
Yeah,
and thank you again to MayoC for sponsoring us. What a fantastic product! Bill and I both stand firmly behind it and support what they're doing, and we really encourage you guys to go and get yourself a free MayoC. Again, soundcloud.com / Kill Bill on the Beat. One word.
Yeah, it's one word.
Right,
don't look into that any further. It's one word with no dashes.
Is there? Am I
dude,
wrong?
don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Dude, this is something I wanted to talk about. I ain't gonna hold you.
No. But actually, hold on. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't wrong. It turns out. Thank you for correcting me. It is Kill Bill on the
Shut
beat.
the fuck up! Stop!
And there you have it. So in case you guys missed it, more again.
Do you know how many fucking bullshit
SoundCloud.com
messages I get a day, bro?
/ Kill Bill on the
No, dude. There's gonna be like one person who hits me up and they're like really dope and they're like, man, I really want to collab, right? But they're gonna get buried by a sea of like, you have small beepy over and over and over again now.
Bill, I don't know what your complaint is about. This has nothing to do with you. This has everything to do with us.
It is my inbox.
Giving our supporters finally something that they deserve. Free products. We've never given, I think, free products, and this is the moment. A free MayoC, the thing that you guys have always been asking for, and go do it now. And if it doesn't work, if you don't get like a response, email confirming whether you got it or you didn't get it, just maybe try again, and just kind of keep at it.
Yeah, dude. Let's move on as fast as possible. You know what I'm saying?
That was a good ad, man.
Yeah, dude, you did
more
great.
Stuff with them.
You did good. There's good product. They're good men and women, and I think that we're just. It's good. So I want to talk about something. So like I said, I ain't gonna hold you up too long. So Rav sent me this game a long time ago, back in like 2013, something like that. Like, it's this indie game.
2012, maybe.
Maybe in 2012. Yeah, maybe. It was this indie game. It was free. Okay. It was a free download game. And this is like kind of in the wake of like when like indie, not necessarily indie horror games, but like kind of surreal indie games were like really popular online. And so like, we had played like Yume Nikki and like Space Funeral. And it was like a lot of games that were kind of already out at that point, but like people were just getting hip to that. Kind of like surrealist, like experimental games that were made by just people in their, bedrooms.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
RPG Maker and shit. Yeah.
RPG Maker, stuff like that. But there was this game, and I cannot find it, and Rav doesn't know the name of it anymore. And I've looked for it up and down. And I was thinking maybe one of you guys would know what I'm talking about. Probably not, but maybe someone can find it. So I'm going to describe the game as best as I can, but it's like kind of fuzzy because I don't remember everything about it, but I remember it was a very surreal game. It did not exactly say what it was about, but it's heavily implied that it was about aliens. But it was split up into like 6 or 7 chapters, and I'm wanting to say that each chapter was done by a different developer. I might be wrong, but the games were very, very different. So I thought it was some kind of collab at some point. Like that's just what I thought in my head. Maybe between like, I don't know if it was 7 different people or if it was like 3 or 4, but I do remember there being like 5 to 7 chapters. And the first chapter was like a pixel art game where it's like you are escaping from what I assume is a government facility, perhaps Area 51, but you look like a normal person, I guess. Like, I always thought it was a normal person. I thought at first that the person was sick and they were like being contained or quarantined, but like later on in the game, I kind of thought that maybe they were an alien, or some sort, maybe was like infected by an alien. I'm not exactly sure. But then there was like a few of those like games that felt like almost like non sequiturs. Like they were kind of like sort of loosely tied in, but they seemed to be, they were so abstract that I couldn't quite like surmise what it was about. But then there was another chapter that was like more of like a point and click type game. It was not pixel art. If I'm pretty sure, I don't remember it being pixel art, but it was like a point and click type game. And there was a lot of dialogue, and it was like all of the people looked very strange, as if they were like mutated in some sort of way. I'm not going to say that they looked humanoid, because some of them didn't. And so it made me think that they were like aliens. Perhaps this was after an invasion has happened, and then like they have like kind of taken over or like integrated with our society. But I remember like the color palettes being very like yellow. Like in that part, like it was like the sun was very like yellow, and the like it was almost like a deserty type situation, even though like it was a city. I might be thinking wrong, but I'm pretty sure that was it. But I can't remember the name of this game, and I was thinking, what is the best way to find it? I've looked up and down for it, but I think because it was like so like obscure at the time that no one really wrote about it or anything. I think Rav, you might have just found it on like maybe itch.io or wherever you were getting games at the time. But I don't know, like Rav, you kind of have like a general like sort of memory of this, but you don't know anything else.
I think I remember what the game is actually.
Oh, what was it?
Club Penguin.